Hi, this is Ian Wright, the osteopath, and actually I was asked to do a little bit of a talk about back to school checks, why children and adolescents, teenagers, etc., it would be a good idea to get them checked out. What we do a lot of time actually when we're working in the practice is check children at certain stages, certain transitional stages. There are clear transitional stages in a child's life that are really important kind of times where you can actually make subtle changes. It's like it's like a tree growing in a certain direction, and if you actually can make sure they're growing straight almost, then they grow straight. So you can kind of apply that thinking to a lot of different areas, and I'm just going to briefly introduce that. I mean, the most obvious one is posture, actually. And there's key transitional times, for example, when a baby starts sitting, crawling, when they start walking for the first time, when they develop their gait. Now, gait develops and changes over the years very much, but certain areas of imbalance can cause problems later. Certain imbalances between the head and the neck, which happen, say, in the birth process, let the head and neck sit slightly offline. Now, what happens is when we develop posture, when we develop our relationship from lying to sitting to standing, we engage our eyes, and our eyes engage with the horizon. There's an important reflex involved with the way our eyes connect with the horizon. That's how we see our midline and our straight. That's how we form our straight. So our eyes have to be straight. If our head and neck's offline, what we'll do is we'll adapt our spine in order to keep our eyes straight. So subtle imbalances at this stage with regards to the mechanics of the cranial bones, the cranial base, or the mechanics of the head on the neck or the pelvis can start showing up even quite young. Skip that to 5-6 years old when the child's active. Bangs, crashes, all sorts of bits and pieces can affect their function. They tend to get over them incredibly well, actually. That's the most important thing. But you tune to 7-8 years old, and I've given podcasts on scoliosis and the development of scoliosis, which is a complex subject. Previously, do refer to those. But imbalances can show up at this time, actually, and in adolescent teenagers. They're kind of key times. Baby, child, very young child, 5, 6, 7 years old, early teens are kind of key times to check the development of posture. Now, there's an interesting connection, which I'm going to talk about on the next podcast, which is going to be about subtle signs in specific learning issues. And it's going to kind of be entitled Behavior, Boredom, or Specific Learning Issues. So, and it's very hard to discern. I'm going to talk about how we discern between those three areas. And at the beginning, it's incredibly hard to. But there are certain things to look out for, one of which is posture, because actually children who have certain functional imbalances in terms of their nervous systems with regards to, say, dyslexias, dyspraxias differently, have different postural manifestations, which I've noticed and noted over the years. For example, in certain dyslexias, there can be a lateral imbalance of the spine. It's a secondary manifestation, and it is actually very treatable. It's not like a proper scoliosis. It's just more of a functional issue. And one of the quickest signs, actually, when treatment is progressing, is they restore their midline. In dyspraxia, they tend to have front-to-back curve issues. They tend to go into dropping their head forwards, sticking their tummy out. Kypholordosis that's more of what that's called. Those are more prevalent in DCD dyspraxia type situations. These are subtle signs, and also they don't have to be severe. You can look for little imbalances. Now, in terms of sports and functional sports and running, there's a lot of kids I treat where we're actually they don't run right. That people come in and the parents say he can't run straight. He's throwing one leg in, or he's not standing straight, And actually, when you point out the postural midline of a child before and after treatment, it's very interesting, because often parents haven't noticed it and they go, oh my goodness, he's really offline. And then it's great because they can see when the changes happen. So posture's a big thing to check in a growing child. And so back to school is a good time, especially when they going through big growth spurts. Also, just to mention to the weight of backpacks, school bags, you put a school bag on one shoulder only, and you're going to put strain on the spine. It has to be on two shoulders. Backpacks are invariably far too heavy. And children are often coming to my practice and many others suffering from back pain, and they're too young for it. There's a specific cause. They're normally more of these functional causes where there's a little imbalance, or they're not using their backpack correctly, etc., etc. They're too young, and these things need to be, I think, eradicated straight away. So other areas and other things that are important to check in these transitional periods, I have to mention stress and anxiety, which is something that we see in practice increasingly. And there's a relatively increasing proportion of the children that we spend time with and treat who come in with symptoms of anxiety, meaning from not being able to go to school because the anxiety is so severe, to subtler signs of it like headaches, tummy pain. They're the most common kind of things. Low energy, poor concentration, that kind of thing can be the effect of anxiety and stress, and it's incredibly common in children, and I've talked about this in lots and lots of podcasts in the past, because it's a hugely increasing area of concern, because children are under far more distress these days. They're pushed very hard by school, and then you've got this massive social agenda and social conditioning that they're having to deal with, and it's distressing and it's overwhelming, and a lot of kids need an outlet for that. And we're often working with ways for them to unwind that build up of tension in their body. Important time, especially in transitional times. The other area, which I've done 5 or 6 podcasts, and the next one will be about, is these subtle signs of specific learning issues, when there is subtle imbalances in the cranial function and the function of the spine, etc., etc. It can be connected to some of the underlying specific learning difficulties, the dyspraxia, dyslexias, sensory integration issues, ASD. And the thing is, these things all cross over. Often the children we see will have not one diagnosis, but they have 2 or 3 different issues, because actually the symptoms they have are difficulties in concentration, attention, possibly impulsiveness. Is that behavioural? Is that a specific learning or behavioural difficulty like ADHD? Or are they bored? And it's very hard to discern at the beginning, but it's very important. We check a lot of children who are starting to have difficulties with, say, reading off the board, concentration difficulties, auditory processing difficulties, difficulty understanding what the teacher's saying, short-term memory issues. And then there's a massive area of coordinational problems, which I've talked about extensively in the past, where there's developmental dyspraxias or more of the subtler forms of that, which we'll see in practice. So that's another thing, is making sure everything's functioning and to its maximum in terms of the nervous system. The immune system, the immune system comes under a huge strain in a child in transitional periods because of the stress of it and because the challenge and change of their systems and their growing systems, especially at certain times, 7, 8 years old again, early teens, big changes in the function of the immune system as well. And they're more prone to infections or asthmas or any kind of tendency to virus or whatever. So actually what we need to do is keep the fluid function in the body working well, which is a sign of immunological healthiness, actually. And we spend a lot of time trying to support that at transitional periods in children. So, this is just a little introduction. There's a myriad of reasons and specific problems that children come to us at these transitional periods of school, from specific learning areas, or to migraine headaches, or to chronic tummy pains, or to postural problems, back pains, huge range. And we know what we see in the practice every day is a huge range. But actually, what we're talking about here is the idea of checking children to optimize function, really, making sure they're happy and performing well. If everything's free and aligned and functioning balanced, they're going to perform better. It's going to be easier for them. And that is, I think, valid, and it seems to be valid anyways. Anyway, that's an introduction, and I'll come back and talk more about some of these subtle signs and specific learning issues, because it's a really important area, I think, to discuss. Okay, I wish you well.